Is your partner incapable of genuine empathy? Do they shower you with affection one day, then become cold and critical the next? Have they slowly isolated you from friends and family who used to support you? These could be signs of narcissistic behavior patterns, but diagnosing someone isn't as important as recognizing when a relationship is harming you. Today, I'll walk you through how to identify these patterns, why we should be careful with labels, and most importantly, what steps you can take to protect your mental health and sanity. The reality behind narcissistic behaviors. Have you ever felt like you're walking on eggshells around your partner, never quite knowing which version of them you're going to encounter today? That constant state of uncertainty, wondering if you'll meet the charming, affectionate person you fell in love with, or the critical, dismissive one who leaves you questioning your worth. This often signals something deeper than ordinary relationship challenges. When we talk about narcissistic behaviors, many people imagine an extreme caricature. Someone completely self absorbed who cares for no one. But the reality exists on a spectrum. These patterns range from mild self-centeredness that many of us display occasionally to the severe persistent traits that constitute the narcissistic personality disorder, or you might have come across them as NPD. Now, this spectrum isn't just theoretical, it's reflected in everyday moments that many of us have experienced, helping you assess your situation with greater clarity. The clinical definition of narcissistic personality disorder includes a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy. But relationships with narcissistic individuals often contain behaviors that don't reach the threshold for clinical diagnosis yet, but they still cause significant pain. Your partner might not meet every criteria in a psychological manual, but their behaviors can nonetheless create an environment of emotional harm for you. Narcissistic traits develop through interplay of several factors. Genetic predisposition creates vulnerability, while childhood experiences involving inconsistent care, neglect, excessive criticism, or unearned praise shape how these tendencies manifest in them. Our culture's emphasis on individual achievement often reinforces these patterns, rewarding behaviors that damage intimate relationships. Studies show approximately 7.7% of males and 4.8% of females exhibit significant narcissistic personality traits. These aren't just abstract statistics, they translate to millions of people navigating relationships with partners who display these characteristics without ever receiving a formal diagnosis. What makes these relationships particularly confusing is their cyclical nature. At first, your partner likely showed intense interest, admiration, and affection, a phase psychologists call idealization. You feel special, chosen, and deeply understood. And then comes the shift. The warmth gradually cooled, replaced by criticism, dismissal of your needs, and indifference to your feelings. This devaluation phase leaves you questioning what you did wrong. It's like riding an emotional roller coaster, thrilling ascents of connection, followed by terrifying drops into rejection, never knowing when the track will suddenly change direction again. This cycling between idealization and devaluation creates profound confusion. You find yourself constantly trying to recapture the relationship's early magic, believing if you just behave differently, your partner will return to treating you with love like before. The inconsistency makes you doubt your own perceptions. Did they really say those hurtful things? Or are you being too sensitive? Over time, this uncertainty depletes your emotional resources. You might notice your confidence eroding, your anxiety increasing, and your sense of self becoming increasingly dependent on your partner's approval. So, how do you distinguish between healthy self confidence and harmful narcissistic traits? 7 specific signs stand out. First, grandiose self importance, consistently exaggerating achievements and expecting recognition regardless of actual accomplishments. Second, excessive need for admiration beyond normal appreciation. Third, notable lack of empathy for your feelings and needs. Fourth, profound sense of entitlement, believing rules don't apply to them. Fifth, exploitation of others as sources of admiration. Sixth, intense envy of others or belief that others envy them. And seventh, arrogant behaviors that appear in tone, dismissiveness, and condescension. These signs form a pattern, and when multiple signs consistently appear in your relationship, they signal potential harm, regardless of any clinical diagnosis or lack of. Recognizing these patterns is a crucial first step towards protecting yourself and making thoughtful decisions about your relationship. The danger of labels. Why diagnosis isn't your job? What happens when we reduce complex human behavior to a single, loaded term like narcissist? In our rush to understand painful relationships, we often grasp for labels that seem to explain everything at once. This impulse is understandable. Naming something gives us a sense of control, a framework for making sense of confusing experiences. But this simplification comes with significant costs. Our culture increasingly encourages casual diagnosis of personality disorders based on limited information. Social media platforms overflow with checklists and quizzes, promising to help you identify the narcissists in your life. This trend reflects a desire for clarity in complicated situations, but it also reflects a misunderstanding of what narcissism actually means in clinical settings. When you label your partner a narcissist without professional assessment, you enter ethically and practically problematic territory. Clinical diagnoses require extensive training and evaluation. They are not determined by articles you read or videos you watched. Personality patterns develop for complex reasons, often stemming from childhood wounds, making them more nuanced than a simple label suggests. You might feel certain about your assessment, but without professional training, you're likely missing important context within that scenario. Consider how focusing on this label might actually prevent you from addressing the real problems in your relationship. When narcissism becomes your explanation for everything, you stop examining specific behaviors and patterns objectively. The label becomes a catch-all excuse that obscures the particular dynamics between you and your partner. Perhaps certain conflicts stem from communication differences rather than narcissistic traits. Maybe some issues reflect incompatible needs rather than personality pathology. Ironically, labeling can become a form of emotional self-protection that keeps you stuck in harmful patterns. Once you've decided your partner is a narcissist, you might use this label to explain away your own participation in relationship problems. This creates a false sense of clarity while actually preventing genuine growth and change within you. You remain fixed in a perspective that offers comfort through its simplicity but fails to capture the full reality of your relationship. Research on confirmation bias helps explain this phenomenon. When you adopt the belief that your partner is a narcissist, you naturally begin noticing evidence that confirms this view, while overlooking contradictory information. You remember instances of selfishness more vividly than moments of great generosity. You interpret ambiguous behaviors through the lens of narcissism rather than considering alternative explanations, which may still apply. This selective attention creates a distorted picture that seems increasingly proven over time. This labeling process often shuts down communication entirely. Imagine how your partner might respond if confronted with this diagnosis. Even someone genuinely open to working on relationship problems would likely become defensive when reduced to a stigmatizing label. Rather than creating space for honest conversation about specific behaviors, the label creates an accusatory framework that triggers protective responses. You've essentially classified them as fundamentally flawed, rather than identifying specific actions that cause harm. This dynamic frequently becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. When you treat someone as though they embody all the worst aspects of narcissism, they may eventually conform to your expectations, not because they inherently match the label, but because human beings tend to respond to how they're perceived. The label creates distance that makes empathy more difficult on both sides, potentially transforming a challenging but workable relationship into one that truly reflects the problems you've named. A more effective approach focuses on specific behaviors rather than diagnostic categories. Instead of asking, "Is my partner a narcissist?" consider questions like, "Does my partner consistently dismiss my feelings? Do they respond with compassion when I'm hurting? Can they admit mistakes and make genuine amends?" These behavior focused questions lead to clearer insights about whether the relationship nurtures or diminishes your well being. The goal isn't determining if someone is a narcissist, but recognizing when behaviors cause harm to you. This distinction matters because it shifts your focus from labeling to understanding impact. A relationship can damage your mental health whether or not your partner meets the clinical criteria for NPD or narcissistic personality disorder. What matters, however, is how their actions affect you, not what diagnostic category best describes their personality structure. Because really, who cares? Whether your partner displays two narcissistic traits or 25, whether these patterns stem from trauma, learned behavior, or neurological differences, one truth remains consistent. Clear boundaries become necessary when someone repeatedly harms your emotional well being. These boundaries aren't about punishing your partner or fixing them. They're about protecting your mental health when you decide whether the relationship can become healthy enough to even continue. In the next section, we'll explore how to establish these essential boundaries, build a support network that helps you maintain perspective, and prepare for the difficult decisions that sometimes become necessary when patterns of harm persist in your life despite your very best efforts. Practical protection, boundaries, support, and difficult decisions. What if you could reclaim your sense of self while navigating a relationship with someone who shows narcissistic traits? This possibility exists, though it requires intentional effort and a fundamental shift in how you approach the relationship. At the core of this shift lies the concept of boundaries, not as punishment for your partner, but as essential protection for your own mental health. Boundaries represent the limits you set to preserve your emotional well being. They mark the difference between healthy connection and harmful entanglement. In relationships with narcissistic individuals, boundaries become your primary defense against the erosion of your very own personal identity. These limits aren't about controlling your partner's behavior, but about defining what you will and will not accept in your life. Setting these boundaries often triggers very strong reactions from them. When someone has grown accustomed to crossing your limits without any consequence, they rarely welcome new restrictions set upon them. Your partner may respond with anger, viewing your boundaries as unnecessary challenges to their authority, which went unchallenged for so long. They might manipulate you through guilt, suggesting you don't trust or love them enough. Perhaps most effectively, they may position themselves as the victim of your unreasonable expectations. These reactions make maintaining boundaries really difficult. Yet, this difficulty signals their importance. Several specific boundaries deserve immediate attention. First, establish limits on criticism. Make it clear that while constructive feedback has its place, persistent criticism or contemptuous comments are unacceptable to you. Second, protect your time and resources. Determine how much of yourself you're willing to give and hold that line firmly at all costs. Third, define consequences for disrespect. Identify what actions you'll take when your partner crosses important boundaries, perhaps leaving the room, taking a day to yourself, or in severe cases, reconsidering the relationship entirely. Fourth, safeguard your relationships with others. Refuse any attempts they make to isolate you from friends and family who provide perspective and support. When your boundaries face resistance, the grey rock method always proves valuable. This approach involves emotional detachment during provocative interactions. When your partner attempts to draw you into circular arguments or emotional reactivity or drama, you respond with minimal engagement. Brief, factual statements delivered without emotional charge. As the Counseling Center group explains, this technique makes interactions less rewarding for someone seeking emotional reactions, potentially discouraging manipulative behaviors over time. Even with strong boundaries, you'll need external support to maintain perspective. A healthy support network becomes essential for reality checking when you begin doubting your own perceptions. Mindwell NYC emphasizes that this network, comprising friends, family, or support groups, helps you stay grounded in reality, offering a counterbalance to distorted narratives. These connections remind you of your worth when your partner's behavior undermines that. They confirm your experiences when your partner dismisses them. They provide the external validation so often withheld in your primary relationship. Many people also benefit from working with a therapist who understands narcissistic dynamic in the relationship. This professional guidance helps distinguish between normal relationship conflicts and the patterns of emotional abuse. Therapy provides a safe space to process confusing experiences and rebuild self-trust damaged by gaslighting and manipulation. It offers practical strategies tailored to your specific situation, and it also validates the legitimacy of your emotional responses. Sometimes, despite implementing boundaries and building support, relationships become too damaging to maintain. This recognition doesn't represent failure, but a rather courageous acknowledgement of reality. The decision to leave requires careful preparation, as ending relationships with narcissistic individuals often triggers predictable but dangerous reactions. If you decide to leave, prepare for several likely responses. First, expect intense efforts to reconnect, what psychologists call hoovering. Your partner may suddenly offer everything you requested throughout the relationship, making promises that seem sincere but often prove temporary. Second, anticipate potential smear campaigns, painting you as unstable, abusive, or mentally ill. The Counseling Center group suggests writing down your reasons for leaving to maintain clarity when these distortions emerge. Third, identify and understand the possibility of long-term fixation or harassment, necessitating clear safety plans and sometimes legal protection. After leaving, many experience a profound identity crisis. As one survivor named Dale shared, after leaving a narcissist, you may feel unsure of who you even are. The narcissist likely consumes so much of your life that your own identity became enmeshed with theirs. It's not uncommon to look in the mirror and wonder, who am I now? This confusion, while painful, signals the beginning of authentic reconnection with yourself. Throughout this difficult journey, remember that your well-being must remain the top priority. Whether your partner meets clinical criteria for narcissistic personality disorder matters much less than how their behaviors affect your mental health. You deserve relationships that nurture rather than diminish who you are. The choices ahead may not be easy, but they represent an opportunity to reclaim your life and rebuild connections based on mutual respect rather than control. In conclusion, when you protect yourself from harmful behavior patterns, you aren't being selfish. You're taking necessary steps for your mental health and future happiness. The experience of constant manipulation and emotional abuse creates chronic stress, anxiety, and depression that diminish your self worth and make you question your own reality. The path forward begins with seeing clearly and valuing yourself enough to require respectful treatment at all times. You deserve connections that help you grow. Seeking therapy becomes crucial for rebuilding your self esteem and reclaiming your autonomy. Remember, every step towards setting boundaries or seeking professional help is a victory in reclaiming your life. Your journey toward peace has already begun, and I wish you the very best in that. Thank you.